Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at what happens when a country's money completely fails. We're talking about the dollarization of Venezuela.
But this isn't just about, exchange rates.
Not at all. We're using this crisis as a launch pad to get into something much bigger. The nature of money itself, state control, and ultimately individual freedom.
And our guide for this is a really dense, really deliberate piece of work. We're pulling insights from a major book called Dolarization, Transactional in la Economía Venezolana.
And this is a serious publication. It was put together by Humberto Romero-Mucci and Fred Ahrens P., and it's a huge effort from Venezuela's top academic bodies.
That's right. The Academia de Ciencias Políticas y Sociales and the Academia Nacional de Ciencias Económicas, they saw what was happening on the ground and knew it needed a proper, deep institutional look.
Exactly. So while the book is broad, we are going to zoom way in on one particularly provocative essay inside it.
It's by Roberto, and the title alone tells you everything. It's called Venezuelan Dollarization, or rather de-Bolivarization, an invitation to relaunch a critical essay on the idea of money and how its regulation could threaten progress and liberty.
That is quite a title. Okay, so here's the mission for you, the listener. We want you to see how a grassroots survival tactic people in Venezuela just starting to use US dollars around 2018 actually forces us to ask these huge questions.
Right, questions about government, about digital money, and what financial liberty even means anymore.
Because it wasn't a choice.
No, it was an unavoidable reaction. The bolivar, their currency, had completely collapsed due to hyperinflation and a total loss of faith in the institutions behind it. Holmes' point is that this isn't just a Venezuelan problem. It's an opportunity for all of us to rethink money in the digital age.
Okay, so let's start there, on the ground. The source material paints a picture of daily survival, right?
It's a daily drama. You have workers, families, shop owners, all forced to basically run two sets of books in their heads.
A bi-monetary system.
An informal one, yeah. Just using the dollar to buy food, to measure value, because their own currency had become, meaningless paper.
And what's so interesting is how Hung frames this. He doesn't really call it dollarization. He calls it de-Bolivarization.
Sure.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because for him, the story isn't about the arrival of the dollar. It's about the destruction of the local currency, the bolivar, and the institutions that were supposed to back it.
So the focus is on the void that was created.
Precisely. He admits that using the dollar brought immediate relief. He calls it an alivio. It stopped the bleeding. It gave people a stable way to price things. But he insists it's only temporary.
So why is it just temporary? I mean, if it works, why isn't it a solution?
Because it dodges the fundamental problem. The underlying failure of the Venezuelan state to manage its money, to maintain any kind of credibility, hasn't been fixed.
You're just putting a Band-Aid on it.
A very necessary Band-Aid, but a Band-Aid nonetheless. He argues that before you talk about formally adopting another country's currency, you have to have a much deeper, more philosophical debate about what money is and how it should be regulated.
It sounds like he's saying the crisis wasn't just bad policy, it was a failure of the entire concept of state-guaranteed money.
That's it. And that's why he sees this as an invitation.
Yeah.
An invitation to re-examine the whole relationship between money, power, and freedom, especially now as we're moving into what he calls the fourth industrial revolution.
The digital age.
The digital age. Everything is changing, and money has to change with it.
This is where it gets really fascinating for me. He goes on this historical deep dive to show that money has, well, it's never been a neutral tool.
Never. It's always been tied up with political power.
So he's asking this big question. When did money stop being just a simple way to trade, salt for grain and become this core instrument of state control?
And he traces it back to early banking. The minute you have something like fractional reserve banking, where a bank lends out money it's holding in deposits, you immediately introduce risk.
And a need for trust.
A need for trust, exactly. You need to trust the institution, the sovereign, the king. And he uses some incredible historical examples to show this.
Yeah, talk about the Knights Templar. I think most people think of them as crusaders, not bankers.
But they were. They created this incredible cross-border financial network, a sort of medieval bank. You could deposit your gold in, say, London, get a promissory note, and then cash it out in Jerusalem.
Which sounds revolutionary.
It was, because it let wealth move across borders, outside the direct control of any single king or kingdom. And that independence, that power, inevitably put them on a collision course with the state.
And we all know how that ended for the Templars.
We do. And then he gives an even clearer example of state enforcement. Kublai Khan.
In medieval China.
Right. Long before the West, His court forced people to use paper money, pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but his decree.
And you had to accept it.
You had to. He would severely punish anyone who refused. Hung uses this to show that the state's monopoly over money has always been about enforcement. It's about ensuring political and physical stability by force if needed.
And that connects to the modern state through taxes. He mentions the potestad tributaria, the state's authority to tax.
That's the linchpin. That is the ultimate guarantee of a currency's value.
How so?
Well, the state legitimizes its own fiat money by demanding that you use that specific currency and only that currency to pay your taxes.
Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's.
He brings that up directly. That obligation is what locks you into the state's monetary system. It's not the gold in a vault anymore. It's the power of the taxman that gives the currency its fundamental value and its monopoly status.
Wow, okay, so that powerful idea of state control through currency. Let's bring it into the modern day. Hung has a really sharp critique of what he calls the compliance culture.
A very severe critique.
And this is something we all deal with. You open a bank account, you get hit with KYC, know your customer, there's AML, anti-money laundering. We're told these rules are there to keep the system safe.
And they are, in theory. But Hung points to this tension between the good intentions and the actual impact on the ground.
What's the problem, in his view?
He argues that when you take these regulations to an extreme, they stop being safeguards and they become this massive, intrusive apparatus of control.
And that it starts to infringe on basic liberties.
On privacy, on freedom of expression, absolutely. He uses this incredibly powerful analogy. He compares the whole regulatory mindset to a modern-day Malleus Maleficarum.
The hammer of witches, the textbook for the Inquisition.
Exactly. He's calling these regulators neo-inquisitors. Is a really shocking comparison, and it's meant to be.
That is a very strong claim. Does he acknowledge that, these rules do stop criminals and terrorists, or is he purely focused on the overreach?
He's almost entirely focused on the warning against overreach. His big concern is how the job of enforcement gets pushed onto private companies.
The banks.
The banks, the financial services. They become the agents of the state, forced to constantly monitor and report on their own customers.
So you're not innocent until proven guilty anymore?
In a financial sense, no. You're a potential suspect until you've proven you're compliant. He argues this just erodes privacy completely, without any of the normal legal protections, like, say, a warrant.
And the system encourages us to be, what, compliant citizens?
Obedient citizens, yeah. And he connects this to the history of civil disobedience. He brings up figures like Thoreau or Lysander Spooner.
Who resisted taxes.
Right. Their resistance was often about fighting state monopolies or unjust taxes. But how can you even attempt that kind of financial resistance when every single transaction you make is tracked, logged, and scrutinized by a central authority? It makes that tradition almost impossible.
The lesson is pretty stark then. Perfect financial visibility for the state means near-perfect control over the individual.
That's the threat he's highlighting.
So if dollarization is just a temporary fix and the traditional state system leads to this kind of overreach, what's the path forward? What's his alternative?
Well, this is where he gets prescriptive. He says we need to start thinking about a new kind of money, something he calls dinero inteligente.
Smart money. Or
Yeah.
intelligent money.
Exactly. And it has to be designed specifically for our digital world. It has to do all the things old money did, be a medium of exchange, a store of value, but it also needs a whole new set of attributes.
Okay, what are they?
For him, they are non-negotiable. It has to be decentralized, universal, transparent, private, and most importantly, it has to protect liberty.
He's basically designing money that is technologically resistant to political meddling.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So how does this ideal of dinero inteligente stack up against the digital currencies that are actually emerging right now, like central bank digital currencies, CBDCs?
Well, CBDCs are basically the opposite of his vision. They're the perfect foil. Hung would argue that CBDCs take the technology of crypto, but they use it to double down on centralized state control.
To make it even more powerful.
Infinitely more powerful. They would give the state total visibility into all transactions and, potentially, programmatic control over money itself.
What do you mean by programmatic control?
Imagine money that the government could program to expire if you don't spend it, or money that can only be spent on certain things. It's a level of financial micromanagement that has never been possible before in history.
That is a chilling thought. So it's not about digital versus analog, it's about centralized versus decentralized.
That is the core tension. And on the other side of that tension, for Hung, you have Bitcoin,
The proof of concept.
the proof of concept for the anti-state vision. He points to its non-normative system. Bitcoin's very existence, he says, proves that it's technologically possible to build an entire economic and legal structure completely outside the state's monopoly.
Because it's peer-to-peer, it's permissionless.
And censorship-resistant. It's a genuine challenge to the state's historical claim over the right to issue money.
So the choice we're facing isn't just about what tech we use, but about what values we build into our financial future. Do we build systems that reinforce central power, like CBDCs, or do we build systems for liberty, like his dinero inteligente?
That's exactly it. His essay is a warning that if we just let states digitize the money they already have, we risk creating the most effective tool of control the world has ever seen.
So to bring this all together, we started with a nation, Venezuela, spontaneously adopting the dollar just to survive.
A response to total institutional collapse.
And this deep dive shows us that issues of currency, banking, regulation, they aren't just for economists. They are deeply, fundamentally tied to progress, to human dignity, and to liberty.
And the really crucial decision we have to make, especially now in this digital transformation, is about what kind of money we design next. Do we build in respect for fundamental rights like privacy and decentralization from the start?
Or do we let this impulse for compliance and regulation create a system that just tightens the constraints on personal and entrepreneurial freedom?
The invitation from Hung is to rethink money from the ground up.
And the lesson feels profound. Money, like any powerful technology, the wheel, electricity, the internet, can be an incredible tool for progress, or it can be a terrifyingly effective instrument for oppression.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought for you to take away and explore.
Okay.
If the spontaneous move to the dollar was the people's inevitable response to a total breakdown of institutional trust, what kind of social contract do citizens need to demand for our digital future? What kind of rules, legally binding, technologically enforced rules, do we need to make sure that whatever digital currency comes next actually serves liberty, instead of just becoming the state's most sophisticated control mechanism yet?